This is Global Tennessee, news, analysis, and commentary from the Tennessee World Affairs Council in Nashville. Global Tennessee is produced in association with the Center for International Business at Belmont University and the International Business Council of the Nashville Area Chamber of Commerce. The World Affairs Council is a nonpartisan, nonprofit educational association, and the views expressed on Global Tennessee are those of the participants.
Welcome to the July 21st episode of Global Nashville with Karl Dean from the Tennessee World Affairs Council. I'm Patrick Ryan. We're pleased you're with us on Zoom and Facebook Live or watching on our youtube.com TN-FDI channel or listening on your Global Tennessee podcast subscription. Tonight, former Nashville Mayor Karl Dean will be talking with Commissioner Bob Rolfe. He heads the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development at a critical time for Tennesseans and the business community. The ECD is responsible for recruiting business and industry to the state, supporting existing companies, expanding economic opportunities across rural Tennessee, and boosting the state's overall economic prosperity. Commissioner Rolfe has served as commissioner since March 2017. Under his leadership, TNECD has increased Tennessee's global footprint. He has led the state's effort in the recruitment and expansion of over 100 international projects, which represent an investment of $5.6 billion and 18,000 job commitments. TNECD has placed a major focus on job creation and community development in rural Tennessee. Since 2017, the department has provided more than $240 million in funding to rural communities throughout the state. In addition, companies have invested $4 billion and committed to create 21,500 new jobs in rural communities over the past 3 years. Commissioner Rolfe has more than 3 decades of experience in business and investment banking in Tennessee. Before joining TNECD, he held the position of CEO of Medical Reimbursements of America, Inc., a company that provides specialty reimbursement solutions to improve financial performance for hospitals and health systems nationwide. He co-founded West End Holdings in 2011, a Nashville-based private equity partnership, and he spent the first 18 years of his career as an investment banker at J.C. Bradford & Company. Commissioner Rolfe received his EMBA from the Owen Graduate School of Management at Vanderbilt University and his BS from the University of Alabama's School of Commerce and Business Administration. Before we start, let me briefly mention that the Tennessee World Affairs Council welcomes you as members, and we welcome your financial support. The Council is a unique nonprofit in the state. It is a nonpartisan educational organization that brings you global affairs awareness programs like this one and our other webinars. We also work with high schools and universities to increase understanding of the world. So please visit tnwac.org where you can join or make a gift. Now, Mayor Dean, we're looking forward to your conversation with Commissioner Rolfe.
Thank you, Pat. And Commissioner, thanks for being with us. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Karl. Great to be with you, sir.
Great. So you have had a very impressive background in investment banking and in business. What made you go into the public sector in 2017?
Well, Governor Bill Haslam at the time, as I love to say, I was his third round draft pick. Bill Haggerty was his first draft pick for 4 years. And then when Bill left the state, Randy Boyd joined the state in the Department of Economic Development. And then he made the decision to run for governor. And it was at that point, Governor Haslam reached out to me, and I was just exiting this company, Medical Reimbursements of America. We had sold it to a Boston-based private equity firm, and his timing just lined up, Karl, within a day or two. And I thought, if there's ever a time that I could perform some public service and not be an elected official, but, provide a service to Tennesseans, this just happened to be the right time. And so for the last, it's now been close to 4 years that I've served in this capacity and have absolutely loved it, because it's one of the outward-facing roles of the state. And our job, as mentioned, is to create jobs for Tennesseans.
Good. And so could you just tell our listeners and viewers what Tennessee Economic Development does? I mean, what is your charge, and how is the office structured?
Okay, so we are funded, obviously our budget is funded by the General Assembly, and I report to our governor, and our job, about 100 people are employed in our department. And so we're one of those outward facing departments, and we're responsible for recruiting companies to our state. So that's job number one. Job number two is to make sure the companies that already call Tennessee home thrive here in Tennessee. And when it comes to an expansion opportunity or a second or third expansion opportunity, we certainly are there to compete for those opportunities. And then the other leg to the stool is our community and rural development initiatives. And that's to make sure that our communities not only, we obviously there's a lot of business prosperity in our more metropolitan areas and urban areas, but it's also to make sure that we create programs to help our more rural communities thrive. And Karl, as you know from your time recruiting as mayor of Nashville, you have a whole host of rich assets. And you have Nashville, Tennessee, and so many great things that were going on under your watch. But imagine one of our 94 counties, and the closest interstate's about an hour away. Well, you could have the greatest workforce and the most beautiful natural assets, but when your third largest cost is transportation of the raw materials in and then finished product out, they're just going to be areas of the state that no matter how good they are not going to enjoy the same level of prosperity.
When people think about business recruitment, they almost immediately think about incentives or trying to lure companies to come to Tennessee. And, I think you and I know that Tennessee has so many assets in the sense that if you can get people here, they're going to want to come. But what is the strategy? How do you go about your job? How do you sell Tennessee? How do you sell Nashville?
Well, it's been a lot of fun because we all know what goes on in Nashville. At the same time, I remind our team every day that we do have 94 other great counties. And so when a company expresses an interest in looking at Tennessee, our job is to show them all of the potential assets. And what I mean by that is if it's advanced manufacturing and it's a 300-acre site and they need rail, well, we'll then bring those, whatever inventory we have available. If it is for IT talent or it is an HQ, obviously we'll bring those, that portfolio to the conversation. But at the end of the day, our job is to make sure that the companies understand all the great things about Tennessee. And you're right, you know this from your days as being the chief recruiting officer for Metro Nashville. Incentives have historically been the conversation component. And I am grateful that we have a General Assembly and Governor Lee, and they understand and they're willing to commit the resources because, as you know, these are all taxpayer dollars. But it has become so darn competitive. And what I mean by that is when we're competing for a project, by and large, 3 or 4 of the adjoining states are competing for that same project. So we have the incentives, but Karl, what's probably newer to the conversation is workforce development. And that's now become, if not number 2, number 1. And that's to make sure that we can convince a company that across Tennessee, wherever that company may choose to locate, that we have the workforce and the size and depth and breadth, and they have the qualifications and skill sets. And so that's where this conversation is expanded beyond incentives.
Right. And I think you would agree with this. My sense has always been that when we used incentives as a city, and I think when the state has done it too, the payback dwarfs the incentive. I mean, I don't think people realize that how much the return is well over the incentive amount.
Well, I'll give you a little bit of inside baseball. I have a meeting with Governor Lee and a couple of his senior leaders on Friday, and this is part of the conversation. So the ROI, return on investment. So for every dollar that we put forth in incentive capital, the ROI from last year's data is about 2.9 years. So that's the return. So for every incentive dollar that goes out, we capture that return within about 2.9 years. So you can imagine every day beyond 2.9 years is all what I'll call gravy. So these are, while there are people that say we shouldn't be providing taxpayer capital to these billion-dollar companies, at the end of the day, I can promise you the day that Tennessee steps away from that conversation and offering those incentives, these companies are going to bypass our state.
Right. And so how do you sell Tennessee? I mean, what's your opening statement? What's your elevator speech?
Well, I think, thank you for asking that. And I'll probably do a terrible job now that you have me on camera, but the short answer is it's about a state that is the most business-friendly state in the U.S. And what I mean by that is it's a state that has no personal income tax, that has the least business tax, that has the lowest per debt capita, and has the least number. We're just a very pro-business state. And then you look behind the curtain and you get beyond just simply the business gates, and you see about what the quality of life is. And as you know, we have 95 counties, and so the quality of life in Upper East Tennessee may feel very different than downtown Nashville. But at the end of the day, it is about being so pro-business, and it's also about having a great quality of life. And then I could go on and on about education and about the Tennessee Promise, the Tennessee Reconnect. But that's something we're very proud of that Governor Haslam and the General Assembly approved. And to tell a business leader from another country that in our state, we value education. Not only does everybody have a high school degree, but once they graduate, tuition free, we offer them a 2-year associate degree or a TCAT certification, and that's tuition free, paid for by the state.
Right. Tennessee has done a lot of things right, I think, in creating this, not a business-friendly atmosphere, and I think the economics of it work, but the work that's been done in education and the emphasis on education is key. And then I always think, as I said, you get people here and they're going to compare it to where they're coming from, and they look at the cost differences, and it's going to be in Tennessee's favor. And then the quality of life and the friendliness, it's a pretty strong package.
That's right. And then, Carl, if it, for example, is an automotive company or a tier 1, tier 2, or tier 3 supplier, when they look at the ecosystem, and we have 900 and some odd companies that are automotive centric across the state that are focused on automotive supply. And of course, if you're an advanced manufacturer and you're an automotive supplier, and you look at where the OEMs are, because that's what everybody is supplying, and you look at where Tennessee's located, and certainly in relation to where we are with the state of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Kentucky, and Mississippi, you can quickly determine. And that's where we're just very lucky that from a transportation perspective, we're within about 1 day's drive of 60% of the population in the country. So that obviously is another logistics positive.
How much of your time and your department's time is spent on international trade, international business?
Well, great question. So if you look at our data, about 30% of all projects that we land are from companies that are foreign direct investment companies. We call these FDI projects, foreign direct investment projects. And so we spend an enormous amount of time at ECD on recruiting these large companies and small companies to come to the U.S., specifically come to the Southeast, and then obviously, if we've done our job, land in Tennessee. But to give you somewhat of a framework, we have FDI representatives in 11 countries. So if you look at Asia, we have an office in Beijing, we have an office in Tokyo, and we have an office in Seoul, Korea. And so those professionals are ECD employees, and their job every day is to sell Tennessee inside those countries. And they also are great about the language challenges. And so unfortunately, my English is very poor on most good days. So the thought of speaking multiple languages just is not in the cards. And then when you look at Europe, we have representatives in 8 countries across Europe. So we're very intentional about having these offices. The ROI on these offices is very good. We do business, Carl, with about 32 different countries that have companies that call Tennessee home. It's over 1,000 different companies. And if you look at the private capital investment, we're talking about $35 billion of invested capital in our state. And then at the end of the day, the real windfall is about 140,000 Tennesseans work for these private companies or these public companies that are foreign direct investment companies.
And how does business recruitment on an international level differ from doing it within the U.S.? I mean, are there particular challenges?
Well, I'll give you certainly the way that we try to approach it. So the large multinationals, when they decide that they've spent their time sizing up the demand, what they're looking for is how many and how large of a market share they can develop in the Americas. And so when they come to the U.S., they're typically manufacturing for at least North America, and if there is a pathway and the demand's great enough, they'll also include South America. And we talked earlier about Bridgestone, for example, their HQ in manufacturing here. And these companies will then hire these site consultants that are US-based site consultants, and their job is to basically collect all of the data. And then they will do an analysis, a comparison, a bake-off, if you will. And what we've discovered is when we are able to have the C-suite, the decision makers come to Tennessee and spend time, that always gives us, we think, that those are positive buy signs. And then, Karl, what I've tried to do with our team is go see these companies in their home communities. And that's certainly not an inexpensive endeavor, but I can promise you, I can point to a whole host of nice wins where these companies have said, my gosh, the state of Tennessee, our governor in some cases will come visit with us, and just, again, think of it as recruiting. You can recruit them on the field, or you can recruit them in their home. And so I've certainly tried to very aggressively spend the time and energy recruiting them in their home countries.
How has sort of the national issues, I mean, leaving the politics all out of this, but how have the national issues around trade wars or whatever, how does that affect your job? I mean, is that something that comes up a lot, or?
Great question. It's something that we've been dealing with for the last couple of years, and it's specifically wrapped around the tariffs. So we would say, as a state of Tennessee, we are so pro-business, we believe in no tariffs for nobody. And so that is certainly our position and how we feel in Tennessee. At the same time, as we all know, this is federal policy, and federal policy is basically being decided at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And we have companies all the time that already call Tennessee home, and they'll understand that there's a tariff being placed on a certain product, and they'll come to us. And so we'll listen and we'll be sympathetic, but it's very difficult for the states to really weigh in and have a significant impact on these federal policies. So if I told you it didn't hurt us, I don't think that would be correct, because those tariffs can be enormously punitive depending on the circumstances.
Does Tennessee have a good reputation internationally for being a welcoming place for business and for non-U.S. folks to move and work?
Well, yeah, I would say yes, sir. And I'm just going to anecdotally give you a couple of examples. A lot of these international companies, they do prefer to cluster. And what I mean by that is they don't want to be the pioneer. They don't want to go first. But once they discover another company that they respect is calling or has called Tennessee home, that buys us an enormous amount of goodwill to allow us to be in that conversation. And I can think of just some of the more recent successes from South Korea. I've probably been there now 10 times in my 38 months. And of course, we have LG, and we have Hankook, and we have Atlas BX, and we have another couple of large manufacturers that are in the automotive business. And they definitely talk about, well, what's it like in Tennessee versus what's it like in other states? Because what I can tell you is today, the competition, as I mentioned to you earlier, in these southeastern states, they all have a lot of the same attributes that we offer in Tennessee.
In terms of the different countries that we work with, I know that, you've mentioned groups of companies coming in. Clearly, Japan has a major footprint here. South Korea, more and more. Canada is a major trading partner. Mexico. Are there others that have really picked
Well,
up?
when you look, thank you, because that when we analyze the data, Japan is our largest FDI trading partner, and if you took the number of projects, the capex, the number of Tennesseans that work for Japanese companies, if you take Japan, they are larger market share than the other 31 countries combined. So that'll tell you just what an important trading partner Japan is. Of course, most of it's around the automotive ecosystem. And then if you look at Canada, the UK, they would stack rank. Probably number 2 would be Canada, maybe 3 would be the UK, and then Germany would be number 4. And then you would find South Korea in that top 10. But that's all to say. And let me say this to you. When I look at South Korea and look at that country, you know, they're the 11th largest GDP on the globe, and that country is not very old. But that'll tell you how interested they are in the U.S., specifically in Tennessee. So we've had some great wins there. Japan, again, you know this from your days as our mayor. Just a great country with a lot of private capital investment in and around Nashville, and of course across our state.
And of course, in Nashville, we have, I guess now we've had it for 10 years or more, 12 years maybe, the Japanese consulate is here. Would it be of benefit to the state if we were able to get more consulate offices within the state?
We are very proud of that, yes, sir. What we discovered is, depending on the budget of the country, and of course, I think Japan may have 12 or 15 consulates across the U.S. Other countries may only have, call it 3 or 4. Yes, sir. Having them here has been fantastic. What's interesting is, if I look at our top 8 or 10 global trading country partners, most of them have a presence, and they cover Tennessee out of Atlanta, which would not surprise you. And so we spend a lot of time in good conversations, and they come see us, we go see them. But I would say we're very proud of, and that I know happened a handful of years ago. You probably were involved in that, but for Japanese consulate. But that's all to say. I wish they were all had a Tennessee presence on the ground, but again, most of them cover us out of Atlanta.
And so obviously one of the most important things affecting your life and the economic development within the state right now is the pandemic. How has that affected your work in terms of international business?
Well, as I said at the outset, Karl, we really pride ourselves in trying to go meet with these companies in their home countries. And as you know, the borders are closed, not only outbound, but certainly inbound. Right before the pandemic hit the U.S., we were finalists on 4 or 5 very large FDI projects across our state. And as you can imagine, everybody has hit the hold button. So the great news is these projects haven't evaporated. They will come back, but we are in that holding pattern until such time as the borders are opened up. And I'm talking about air travel between countries. So we will stand by, and we've had Zoom calls. We offer virtual tours. We're doing everything we can electronically. But Karl, I can promise you this, you know this from recruiting, there's nothing like being across the table with the decision makers and talking about your state and the great attributes. And of course, when they're going to commit $100 million to invest anywhere, that CEO, he or she wants to go see it before they're going to make those kinds of decisions. So we've been handicapped like the other states about, having these international executives come to the U.S.
Do you see, as a result of the pandemic, any changes or advantageous situations perhaps for Tennessee in terms of supply chain changes or near shoring or things of that nature?
Yes, sir. Well, great question. And so I think the short answer is these companies, and I'm talking about companies that are manufacturing in the U.S. that require a supply chain that's global. They are very intentional going forward about making sure after this pandemic, since it wasn't in the playbook, they are coming forward about with some great interest in what I'll call reshoring and bringing their supply chain much closer to the U.S. because you can imagine the disruption of what this has created. So the great news, the U.S. will win here, I think, and we'll see more projects come to the U.S. as a result of the pandemic.
Right, and so long term, I mean, do you have any sense of what the impact of the pandemic is on jobs that are tied to foreign investment? Have we felt an actual decline yet, or is?
No, sir. So about, as I said, about 140,000 Tennesseans work for these foreign companies. And so, yes, those in the automotive system that have been a part of the supply chain they did all shut down because the OEMs shut down. But as they've come back, it turned, as I like to think of it, as a light switch, a dimmer switch. As you turn the lights back up, the great news is we're not aware of any of these suppliers that haven't come back online to supply the OEMs. So now, have we as a state felt a significant impact? Unfortunately, we have, and Governor Lee, I think, has done a fabulous job of being so thoughtful about how we turned our economy down and also how we turned the economy back up. Because I've watched other states and what they're dealing with. And again, everybody has kind of not one size fits all. So I think Tennessee has done the best we could do under the circumstances.
Well, on a personal level, do you like traveling? Is that something you enjoy?
Well, Karl, the sixth trip to China probably was not as exciting as the first trip. And so I would answer it that way. At the same time, I know it's part of the program. I think the difference is historically, some other in prior lives, other ECD commissioners have taken trips and they've lasted a week to 10 days and they've knocked on doors in those countries. The strategy, and it's certainly not the right or wrong way to do it, is we go to that country and we strike when it's hot and we get on the plane and come home. So that may be a differential. So that requires a lot of international travel. And at the same time, I think I just get used to it. I've not developed a passion for sleeping on airplanes. So I've got a long way to go. But anyway, it's been good.
So you get there and it's pretty focused on business and a lot of meetings and then you go home. And a lot of time.
Karl, I'll give you another little inside baseball. So Governor Lee, in his first international trip, we went to Asia. So we landed, you fly, it's about a 25-hour flight into Seoul. We have a dinner, we have a breakfast, we have a lunch. We get on a plane, we fly to Japan, we have a dinner, we fly to the next city in Japan, we have a reception, have 3 meetings, and we get on the plane and come home. And I can't tell you that would be something that Governor Lee would say was a highlight of his first year. But again, and the great news is we covered a lot of ground and met with a lot of great companies. So again, everybody has their different way about going about how they transact business. But that was one that I found to be effective.
Great. Pat, do we have, is there?
We've got a question from Jonathan Griffin, but I think you incorporated that pretty well into the conversation, Karl, the impact on job numbers and business revenues. If I could ask a question, I lean towards the national security side of issues, being a retired naval intelligence officer. Can you talk a little bit about the impact? We're creating a lot of friction these days, especially in places like China and Europeans and so forth. How do those non-business frictions impact the work that you're trying to do?
Well, Patrick, another great question. Let's focus on China. We have more than a handful of Chinese companies that call Tennessee home, and they've invested a great deal of capital. What's interesting is right before the pandemic, Patrick, we were in great conversations with 3 or 4 other Chinese companies that were looking to bring their manufacturing processes to the U.S. those projects are on hold because the Chinese decision makers aren't obviously coming to our country, and we're not able to go there. That is a little more sensitive today, and there is a heightened awareness. You can imagine the Chinese companies have reached out to us to just say, well, what is Tennessee's position? And our position is that we treat every company interested in our state, with the equal respect. And if that company is going to come to our state and invest an enormous amount of capital and employ Tennesseans, and obviously they're doing within our laws, we're very much in favor of it. But the sensitivity is so high right now with anything China related. And so I'll stay away from the political side of that, but that's one where we've seen some significant challenges. And so.
Well, the temperature's certainly gone up in recent years, and I suspect there's some overlay on the business side. That's it for questions, Karl.
All right. Well, Bobby, let me thank you for taking the time to do this. I really appreciate it. I know you've got a lot of things on your plate, and wish you good hunting as you continue your efforts.
Well, Karl Dean, thank you. You know how much I appreciate our friendship and what all you've done in your career. And so thank you for allowing me to talk about ECD today. So all good.
Again, thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mayor Dean. And that's it for this edition of Global Nashville with Karl Dean. Please come back next week as we have a global dialogue with Admiral Bill Owens to talk about U.S.-China relations, an extension of some of what we talked about tonight, and also next Tuesday afternoon, our news review. So we'll see you then. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Everybody be safe.